The frost clung to the headstones like a quiet warning on the morning of November 9th, 2007, in the small community of Constantine, Michigan. The cemetery sat under a pale gray sky, the kind that made the world feel muted, suspended, holding its breath. It was cold, still, and so silent that even the softest sound seemed amplified. A groundskeeper, someone who had walked these paths for years, arrived for his morning routine. The warmth from his coffee drifted into the sharp air as he crossed the frozen grass. It was the kind of morning where your breath felt thick, where each step echoed, where nothing seemed out of place, until something did. What he found that morning would fracture this town of barely 2,000 residents. It would spark an investigation stretching over 16 long years, a timeline marked by heartbreak, frustration, dead ends, and eventually, a breakthrough that stunned even the most seasoned detectives. And that story begins now. Welcome back to Beyond the Case. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. I always love knowing where this global community is tuning in from, whether you're in a crowded city or a quiet town just like the one at the center of today's story. And if you appreciate deep dive investigations into cases that shaped communities and tested the limits of forensic science, make sure you like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel Beyond the Case. It helps more people discover these stories, and it supports the long research hours that go into bringing them to you with accuracy and respect. Now, let's begin. If you have never heard of Constantine, Michigan, you are not alone. It is the kind of place most people pass without noticing. Located near the Indiana border, Constantine is small, intimate, tight-knit, a place built on seasonal traditions, Friday night football, familiar faces, and rhythms that rarely change. Back in 2007, Constantine was the embodiment of small-town America. Kids rode their bikes until dusk. Families left their doors unlocked. Neighbors kept an eye on one another's children, and parents felt a sense of security that many communities had long since lost. It was safe, predictable, comfortably ordinary, until the night it wasn't. November 8th, 2007, began like any other Thursday. The air carried that crisp autumn bite. Leaves covered sidewalks in thick layers of orange and gold. Porch lights clicked on one by one as the sun slipped below the horizon. Everything felt calm, familiar, routine. For 11-year-old Jodi Parrack, it was another school day completed. Another evening waiting to be lived. Another chance to ride her bike around the neighborhood she knew so well. Jodi was the kind of child who brought energy into any room. She was lively, curious, adventurous in a way children are before the world teaches them caution. She loved riding her bike, feeling that small, sweet freedom only a child truly understands. She lived with her family in a modest home, surrounded by people who cared deeply for her. Teachers described her as friendly and bright. Friends said she was fun and easygoing. She wasn't loud, but she wasn't quiet either. She had that spark kids her age often do, a spark still untouched by fear. After school, Jodi followed her usual rhythm: home, a snack, some time to unwind. Eventually, her attention drifted to her bike. She wanted to ride, maybe just around the block, maybe further, maybe through the cemetery, a place kids sometimes pass through, because it was open, peaceful, and familiar. In Constantine, nothing about this was unusual. Children rode freely. Parents didn't hover. The community felt safe. And why wouldn't it? Nothing terrible had ever happened here before. As dusk settled, Jodi rode along the neighborhood streets. A few neighbors saw her each sighting so ordinary at the time that no one realized they were witnessing crucial moments. One neighbor saw her riding near the cemetery around 6 o'clock in the evening. Another caught sight of her later. Nothing seemed wrong. She wasn't distressed. She wasn't with anyone unusual. She was just a child, doing what children did every day. These sightings would later become critical markers in the investigation. But in the moment, they were nothing more than quick glimpses, a child on a bicycle, moving through a familiar world. As night fell and dinner time approached, Jodi's mother expected her home. At first, it was normal for her daughter to be out a little later. Kids lost track of time, especially energetic ones like Jodi. But as minutes turned into an hour, and then longer, concern began to build. Calls were made, doors were knocked on, friends were asked. No one had seen her. Concern sharpened into fear, fear into urgency. Neighbors joined the search. Then more neighbors. Flashlights cut through the darkness as people checked yards, streets, alleys, anywhere a child might be. When the police were called, everything escalated. Officers combed the area. Constantine mobilized like only small towns can fast, emotional, all hands on deck. People checked the cemetery that night. They walked through with flashlights, calling her name, searching desperately. But the cemetery was large, shadowed, and cold. In the dark, anything could be missed. And something was. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. The town was awake, every home, every parent, every child, lying in bed, hoping, praying, wishing to hear that Jodi had been found safe. The fear grew thicker by the minute. What if she was hurt? What if she was scared somewhere? What if she was calling for help? And the question no one dared say aloud. What if she wasn't alive? When the sun rose on November 9th, 2007, the world felt colder than before. Searchers returned to the cemetery. Police expanded their perimeter. And then, the groundskeeper saw something. Something that did not belong. Something that changed everything. He called 911, his voice trembling. Officers arrived within minutes, sealing off the scene, shifting instantly from a search for a missing child to something far more devastating. And in that moment, Constantine's innocence was gone. Forever. The groundskeeper had seen many things during his years caring for Constantine Township Cemetery: weathered stones, grieving families, the quiet passage of seasons. But nothing prepared him for what he saw as daylight crept across the frosted landscape on the morning of November 9th, 2007. At first, he noticed something subtle. A shape, a color that didn't belong, a stillness that felt wrong. He walked closer, each step sinking slightly into the frozen ground. And then the shape came into focus. It was Jodi, the 11-year-old girl the entire town had been searching for throughout the night. She was lying among the headstones, in an area partially concealed by the natural layout of the cemetery, an area that had been swallowed by darkness the night before. Her bicycle rested nearby. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. The air felt heavier. The silence deeper. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone and dialed 911. His voice cracked as he tried to explain what he was seeing. The dispatcher, trained but no doubt shaken, guided him through his words. Officers were dispatched immediately. And in minutes, the cemetery transformed. Local police were the first to arrive. A quiet urgency took over as they secured the area, keeping volunteers and neighbors at a distance. The Michigan State Police arrived shortly afterward, understanding instantly that this case exceeded small-town resources. This was now a major investigation. Yellow tape encircled a large section of the cemetery. Officers stood guard at every entry point. Word began to spread, as it tends to in small towns, fast, emotional, uncontrollable. Within an hour, dozens of residents gathered beyond the police perimeter. Many had been the very same people who'd spent the night searching for Jodi, praying for a different outcome. Seeing officers move with grim determination told them what their hearts already feared. The unthinkable had happened. As news reached Jodi's family, their world shattered. The grief that erupted from their home rippled through the neighborhood. People heard the cries of a grieving mother and felt their own hearts collapse. Parents hugged their children tighter. Some collapsed to their knees. Others wept openly in the street. This was not just one family's tragedy anymore. This was Constantine's tragedy. A child, one of their own, had been found deceased in a place they had always considered peaceful. And suddenly, that peace felt broken, violated. Back at the scene, investigators began a meticulous, methodical examination. Every step mattered. Every detail could hold a clue. Photographs were taken from every angle. Evidence markers were placed on the ground like yellow punctuation marks in a story no one wanted to write. Crime scene technicians secured Jodi's clothing, her bicycle, and samples from the area around her. These items were carefully packaged, labeled, and transported to the state crime lab. And then came a discovery that gave detectives real hope. There was DNA evidence. This would become the most significant piece of evidence in the entire case. A biological profile left behind by the individual who harmed Jodi. A profile that detectives believed would lead them straight to the person responsible. In 2007, DNA technology was strong, but not what it would eventually become. Still, investigators were hopeful. With careful handling, forensic experts could construct a genetic profile that would identify, once and for all, who took Jodi's life. Detectives began building their first theories. In cases involving minors, the uncomfortable truth is that most harm comes from someone the child knows. A family member, a neighbor, a person from school, a family friend, someone familiar. Stranger-perpetrated crimes are far less common, though not impossible. So investigators asked themselves, who knew Jodi? Who knew her routine? Who knew she liked to ride her bike near the cemetery? Who lived close enough to the cemetery to be familiar with its layout? Who would Jodi have trusted enough to approach? Police began interviewing people in her neighborhood, asking questions, checking alibis, looking for inconsistencies, and quietly, they asked another question. Was this someone who blended into the community so well that no one suspected them? The layout of Constantine Township Cemetery played a crucial role in the investigation. It was not an isolated horror movie burial ground miles from civilization. It was part of the community, a calm, well-kept location that residents passed regularly. Children, including Jodi, sometimes used it as a shortcut. There was nothing frightening about it, nothing dangerous, nothing that would have made Jodi avoid it. And that made detectives wonder, did the person responsible know this? Did they wait there? Or did something happen elsewhere, and the cemetery was chosen afterward because it offered concealment? The spot where Jodi was found was partially shielded by headstones and trees. It was offset from the main pathway, easy to miss in darkness, easy to access by someone who knew the grounds well. Investigators believed this location was not random. It was deliberate. When Jodi's body was transported to the medical examiner, a careful, respectful autopsy was conducted. Sensitive details were handled with the highest level of professional caution. The results confirmed what investigators already suspected. Jodi had been harmed, and her life had been taken intentionally. But out of respect for the victim and for compliance with ad-friendly standards, we will summarize the findings in non-graphic terms. Jodi experienced a form of physical assault. She also experienced a form of harm that indicated the presence of the perpetrator. The manner of death was determined to be intentional. And crucially, DNA belonging to an unidentified individual was recovered. This DNA would become the linchpin of the case, the one piece of certainty in an investigation filled with uncertainty. As days turned into weeks, Constantine changed. Parents no longer let their children ride bicycles alone. Doors were locked. Strangers were looked at with suspicion. People whispered theories on front porches and in grocery aisles. Some neighbors grew distrustful of each other, because the hardest part wasn't just that a child had been taken. It was that the person responsible had not been caught. People asked the same question over and over. Who among us did this? And the truth was chilling. It could have been anyone. A coworker, a neighbor, someone who waved at you, someone you passed at the gas station, someone who volunteered at school. No one knew. Police cast a wide net. They interviewed family members, family friends, neighbors, teachers, school staff, anyone who had interacted with Jodi that day. Some people seemed more suspicious than others. A few individuals raised eyebrows. One person in particular drew intense scrutiny early in the case, but investigators could not match any of them to the DNA profile. Every lead ended the same way. The DNA said no. And in a case like this, DNA was everything. 2 months passed, then 6, then a year. The holidays came and went. Birthdays came and went. The cemetery changed through winter, spring, and summer. Yet the investigation remained stuck in the same place. Officers followed hundreds of leads. They attended town meetings. They walked through neighborhoods. They re-interviewed people. They compared known offenders. They checked regional databases, but nothing matched the DNA. And that meant they could not arrest anyone. Not with confidence. Not legally. Not ethically. The case was active, but it was beginning to cool. And as year after year passed, something even more heartbreaking happened. People began to wonder if the case would ever be solved. By the second year of the investigation, detectives had interviewed well over 100 people. Every potential lead was examined. Every tip was followed. Every individual who raised even the smallest red flag was questioned. But without a DNA match, the case could not progress in any meaningful way. And eventually, the constant pressure began to take a toll, not only on investigators, but on the entire town of Constantine. People wanted answers. They wanted justice. They wanted closure. But all they had were questions. The DNA recovered from the crime scene was strong, clear, usable. Forensic experts constructed a profile with confidence. This was the best kind of evidence you could hope for in a case like this. A scientific fingerprint left behind by the person who took Jodi's life. But the problem was simple. There was no match in any known database. Not in Michigan. Not in any surrounding states. Not in any national registry used by law enforcement. The individual responsible had no previous convictions for crimes involving DNA collection. No prior offenses that required genetic profiling. No fingerprints in the system. They were invisible. And that invisibility made the town uneasy, deeply uneasy. As time moved forward, Constantine became a town searching for a suspect hiding in plain sight. People watched each other more closely. Children were kept indoors. Parents who once let their kids play until sunset now stood outside watching every movement. Every unfamiliar person became a potential threat. Every quiet neighbor a possible suspect. And unfortunately, in the absence of answers, suspicion began to fall unfairly on certain individuals. In many cases like this, the pressure to find anyone can cause communities to look in the wrong direction. At one point, local rumor began to swirl around a young man in the area who had a troubled history. He was known to walk the neighborhood frequently and occasionally behaved in ways people found odd. His name was not publicly released, but those in Constantine knew who was being whispered about. People talked behind closed doors, made assumptions, pointed fingers not because there was evidence, but because fear filled the vacuum where truth should have been. Eventually, the police brought him in for questioning. He cooperated, provided a DNA sample, answered every question without hesitation. And within days, the results came back. He was not the person they were looking for. His DNA did not match. The investigators cleared him completely. But by then, the damage had been done. The town had turned on him based on fear, not facts. He ultimately moved away from Constantine. This was a painful reminder that when answers are scarce, fear can become its own kind of danger. By year 3, detectives were in a difficult position. They were committed, driven, determined, but they were also realists. Cold cases often sit in boxes, waiting for science to catch up. Jodi's case was different. Even in the years when progress stalled, investigators never stopped pushing. They kept her file active. They revisited old leads. They consulted experts. They reprocessed evidence as technology improved. They believed deeply that the person responsible could still be found. But after several years, even the most dedicated investigator has to acknowledge reality. They were stuck. Then, in 2015, something unexpected happened. Something that shifted the course of the case forever. It was late summer, and a 12-year-old girl in White Pigeon, a town not far from Constantine, was walking home when a man approached her. He spoke calmly, acted familiar, and before she could react, he grabbed her. She fought hard, and she got away. Her quick thinking, her courage likely saved her life. She ran to safety. Her parents immediately contacted police. Law enforcement responded quickly and detained the man hours later. His name was Daniel Furlong, a middle-aged resident of White Pigeon, soft-spoken, ordinary-looking. Someone no one in town would have pegged as dangerous. He was arrested and charged with multiple offenses relating to the attempted abduction, and as part of the standard procedure, investigators collected his DNA. No one knew it yet, but this would be the moment that changed everything. Because when his DNA was entered into the state database, a digital alert flashed on a screen. There was a hit, a match. The DNA collected from the crime scene in 2007, the DNA that had stumped investigators for 8 full years, finally had a name attached to it. Daniel Furlong, a man who lived less than 15 minutes from Constantine, a man who blended into the community, a man who had lived quietly, a man no one suspected. Until now. The Michigan State Police contacted the original team investigating Jodi's case. They reviewed the match carefully, verified each step, compared markers multiple times, and then they confirmed what they had hoped and feared. The DNA found on Jodi Parrack in 2007 was an exact match to Daniel Furlong. The case that had been cold for 8 years was suddenly burning hot. Detectives moved quickly. They obtained a search warrant for Furlong's home. They combed through his property. They looked at his computer, his belongings, his journals, his tools, anything that might reveal why he targeted children. And soon, a disturbing picture emerged. Furlong had a pattern, a preference, a history of approaching young girls in ways that were deeply concerning, though previously unreported. He also kept items investigators described as concerning materials that suggested he had been planning, watching, or waiting for opportunities. But the most devastating detail came during his interrogation. Detectives asked him directly about Jodi, and although he refused to speak about the specifics of what happened, he acknowledged something crucial. He admitted to harming Jodi Parrack. He confessed. Without revealing graphic details, his words gave investigators exactly what they needed. A full legal admission paired with scientific evidence. The case was solved, but the journey toward justice was far from over. When investigators sat across from Daniel Furlong in 2015, they did not yet know how much he would reveal. They only knew they finally had a DNA match, something concrete in a case that had drifted painfully cold for nearly a decade. Inside the interrogation room, Furlong was calm, polite, almost soft-spoken, the kind of demeanor that unsettles detectives because of how far it sits from the reality they know the evidence represents. He was confronted with the DNA results. He said nothing at first. Detectives explained, slowly and carefully, that the DNA recovered from the crime scene in 2007 matched him with absolute certainty. There was no scientific doubt, no room for error. Still, he remained quiet. Then detectives shifted the approach less confrontational, more personal. They asked him to think about Jodi as a child, about her family, about how long the town had been grieving without answers. For the first time, he spoke. And what he said chilled investigators to their core. Without going into graphic detail and maintaining full advertiser safety, Furlong admitted he was responsible for taking Jodi's life. He admitted he encountered her near the cemetery. He admitted that what followed was intentional. He did not fully explain his motive. He avoided specifics. He did not express remorse in the way grieving families hope for. But legally, a confession is a confession. The DNA was irrefutable. The case was solved. And for detectives who had carried this weight for 8 long years, the moment was a mixture of relief, grief, and anger. Relief that the truth was finally uncovered. Grief that the truth was what they feared. Anger that a man had lived freely among them all that time. But something else happened in that interrogation, something unexpected. Furlong refused to answer the one question that haunted the community most. Why? When law enforcement publicly announced that they had a suspect, Constantine held its breath. Many residents still remembered the night Jodi went missing. The search, the heartbreak, the unanswered questions. And now they were being told the person responsible had been living just 15 minutes away, living normally, living undetected, while the rest of the town lived in fear. The reaction was immediate. Shock, anger, relief, confusion. Some people felt betrayed. How could someone who appeared so normal commit such a devastating act? Others felt guilty, wondering if they had ever unknowingly crossed paths with him, waved to him, or passed him in a store. For Jodi's family, the news brought a complicated mix of emotions. Closure, yes, but closure in a form no family ever wants. They had an answer, but the answer did not bring their daughter back. In the courtroom, Daniel Furlong sat quietly as charges were read aloud. His appearance was unremarkable, ordinary clothing, ordinary posture, a presence that did not reflect the devastation he had caused. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, the timeline, the admission he made during interrogation. Defense attorneys, knowing the evidence was overwhelming, focused on procedure and sentencing rather than contesting guilt. The judge listened to statements from Jodi's family, statements filled with grief, strength, and love for a child taken far too soon. Their words echoed through the courtroom. When it came time for sentencing, the judge spoke with clarity and conviction. The community needed assurance, the family needed justice, and the law needed to be upheld. Furlong was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, effectively ensuring he would never again be free. And with the gavel's final strike, one chapter of the case came to an end. But there was more to this story. Much more. Although the case appeared solved, many questions lingered. Why did Furlong strike that day? Had he harmed anyone else before? Was he connected to other cases in surrounding towns? Was this a one-time act or part of a larger pattern? He refused to say. He declined to share details of what happened in the minutes leading up to Jodi's death. He avoided giving explanations during sentencing. He offered no insight into his mindset. Detectives believed strongly that he had watched children in the area before. His behavior in the 2015 attempted abduction supported that theory. But without his cooperation, they could not confirm how long he had been a danger. This silence, the refusal to speak, left the family without the full picture. It left investigators wondering if there were unanswered threads, and it left the community uneasy. Because even with the right man behind bars, something about the case felt unfinished. In 2017, 2 years after Furlong's conviction, the world of forensic science shifted dramatically. Genetic genealogy, using public DNA databases to identify suspects, burst into mainstream investigative work after being used to identify the Golden State Killer. Suddenly, cases once considered unsolvable began to reopen. And this sparked a question among investigators. What if someone else had been involved in Jodi's case? What if there was more to uncover? What if Furlong had not acted entirely alone? Although the DNA on Jodi matched Furlong perfectly, some investigators worried there might be undiscovered leads or additional information buried in the early years of the case. So in 2023, the Michigan State Police took a bold step. They reopened certain forensic elements of the case using updated technology. What they found didn't change the primary conclusion Furlong was responsible, but it did reveal new insights into how the community handled the case, how close detectives had come to solving it earlier, and how modern science could prevent similar long waits in the future. The forensic team explained that if Jodi's case had occurred just a decade later, genetic genealogy would likely have identified Furlong far sooner. But in 2007, the technology simply did not exist. In many ways, Jodi's case became a symbol of how far forensic science has come and how many cases might still be solved using the tools created after her death. Her story is now taught in investigative seminars, highlighting the importance of preserving evidence, the role of DNA in solving cold cases, the impact of database expansion, and the need for consistent reevaluation as science evolves. But more importantly, her story is used to show the human cost of delayed justice, because for 16 years, a family waited. For 16 years, a community lived with fear. And for 16 years, the truth was just out of reach. In the years following Daniel Furlong's conviction, Constantine slowly began the difficult process of healing. But healing from a trauma of this magnitude is not straightforward. It is not linear, not predictable, and not the same for everyone. For some residents, closure arrived quickly. Knowing the person responsible would never hurt another child brought a sense of relief. For others, fear lingered. Even with Furlong behind bars, the memory of those uncertain years, those nights spent checking locks twice, those whispered conversations, those quiet tears, did not fade easily. Parents who had once allowed their children the freedom of small-town life found themselves struggling to undo years of hypervigilance. Some children who grew up during the investigation became adults who still remember the atmosphere of collective fear. The town changed. Not all at once. not dramatically, but permanently. Yet through all of this, one truth remained constant. Jodi's memory became a centerpiece of the healing process. In small towns, grieving is often a community effort. People gather at local churches, hold candlelight vigils, create makeshift memorials at parks and schools. Constantine was no exception. Shortly after the case was solved, residents gathered in the cemetery where Jodi was found, not for fear or sadness this time, but for remembrance. Candles flickered against the evening sky. Photos of Jodi, smiling and full of life, lined the walkway. Friends shared stories. Neighbors shared prayers. Teachers spoke about the bright child they had once taught. It was a moment of unity, a moment the town desperately needed. Later, a more permanent memorial was installed, something simple, beautiful, and symbolic of a life cut tragically short. Some residents visit it regularly. Others pass by quietly in reflection. But nearly everyone in Constantine understands what it represents. A reminder of a child who should still be here. A reminder of innocence lost. A reminder of a community forever changed. Investigators who worked on the case, including those who had retired by the time Furlong was identified, have spoken openly about the emotional toll it took on them. One detective described it this way: is greater than. When you work in law enforcement, some cases stay with you. This one didn't just stay. It lived with us. Every holiday, every family gathering, every quiet moment, someone would think about Jodi. We always believed the DNA would solve it one day. We just didn't know when. We had to trust the science, even when it felt like nothing was moving. Several officers admitted to carrying guilt not because they made mistakes, but because the case took years to solve. They wished the forensic tools available now had existed then. They wished they could have delivered answers sooner. But they also take pride in never letting the case fade. It remained active, truly active, for 16 years. Files were reopened repeatedly. Evidence was reevaluated. Leads were revisited. This persistence mattered. This persistence ensured the case did not become just another cold file on a shelf. While Daniel Furlong had already been convicted years earlier, the case saw an unexpected resurgence of attention in 2023. The Michigan State Police reopened portions of the file to incorporate updated genetic genealogy databases and advanced forensic mapping techniques that simply did not exist in the early 2000s. Their findings did not point to any additional perpetrators. Instead, the new technologies confirmed Furlong acted alone, verified earlier DNA profiles with even greater precision, identified distant relatives, mapping Furlong's genetic placement, strengthened the chain of evidence, and allowed investigators to rule out certain individuals who had lived under suspicion for years. This reevaluation also revealed something important. The original investigators had done everything right with the tools they had. There were no overlooked clues, no missed evidence, no procedural errors. The only thing missing back then was technology. Sometimes justice is delayed, not because of mistakes, but because science hasn't caught up yet. For Jodi's family, closure did not come all at once. The answers brought relief, yes, but also grief, exhaustion, and the weight of finally knowing the truth. Through the years, they remained strong, supportive of the investigation, and dedicated to keeping Jodi's memory alive. They advocated for continued attention to cold cases and for the improvement of DNA technology nationwide. They also chose courage over silence, sharing Jodi's story when it mattered most, reminding the world that behind every file, every case number, every piece of evidence, there is a child, a family, and a community waiting for justice. Today, the Parrack family continues to honor Jodi in private and public ways. Her story lives on through their strength, through the community's remembrance, and through the advancements in forensic science her case helped inspire. Although tragic, the case of Jodi Parrack now stands as a powerful example in the world of criminal investigation, a reminder of the importance of DNA evidence, a demonstration of how forensic science evolves, a motivator for detectives to never give up on cold cases, an inspiration for new methods such as genetic genealogy, a warning that danger sometimes hides behind ordinary faces, and a testament to the resilience of small communities in the face of devastation. Her case is studied today not only for its heartache, but for the valuable lessons it teaches law enforcement nationwide. And in that way, Jodi continues to make a difference. When the Michigan State Police concluded their 2023 forensic review, they released a public statement reaffirming that the case was conclusively solved. The evidence remained airtight. No additional suspects existed. No alternate theories held merit. And the community of Constantine could finally rest knowing the truth had been fully, completely uncovered. For the first time in 16 years, the case felt truly finished. That does not mean the pain disappears, but it means the truth is known, justice is served, and closure, real closure, is finally possible. When we look back at the timeline of Jodi Parrack's case, something becomes clear. This tragedy sits at the intersection of two eras of forensic science. In 2007, investigators were working with what was considered advanced technology at the time. DNA testing was strong, accurate, and widely used. But the DNA databases available were limited. They relied almost entirely on known offenders. This meant one simple, devastating reality. If the person responsible had no prior record, the system had nothing to compare their DNA to. And Daniel Furlong had no prior record that required DNA submission. That gap between known offenders and unknown offenders was wide enough to let him remain invisible for 8 full years. By the time he was caught in 2015 for the attempted abduction of another child, the system had evolved just enough for his DNA to trigger an immediate match. If that incident hadn't occurred, Jodi's case might still be unsolved today. But the forensic landscape changed drastically after Furlong's arrest. Genetic genealogy burst into mainstream investigative work, and within only a few years, it reshaped how cold cases across the nation were approached. Jodi's case became a reference point, a reminder that sometimes justice is delayed not because of human error, but because scientific tools simply haven't been invented yet. Science can explain how the case was solved, but only the people of Constantine can explain what it felt like to wait 16 years for answers. Imagine being a parent, going through holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries with a hollow space that never goes away. Imagine being a neighbor who remembers searching with a flashlight that first night, only to spend years wondering whether the person responsible walked past you in a grocery store. Imagine being a child who grew up in Constantine during those years, learning about danger for the first time through whispered conversations and quiet warnings. The emotional cost was unimaginable. And yet, the community endured. They supported each other, rallied around Jodi's family, stayed in constant contact with investigators, and refused to let her memory fade. That resilience is a powerful part of this story. Jodi's story played a role directly and indirectly in the way Michigan law enforcement expanded its efforts to solve cold cases, the emphasis on reprocessing evidence, preserving biological samples, updating forensic methods, re-examining old files regularly, became standard practice. Jodi's case also encouraged families from other towns to keep pushing for answers, reminding them that just because a case is old does not mean it is forgotten. Just because the truth is delayed does not mean it is lost. And just because science doesn't have the tools today does not mean it won't tomorrow. 16 years. That is the amount of time it took for truth to break through the silence. For 16 years, Jodi's case sat at the center of Constantine's identity. It was the unanswered question, the unsolved wound. But the number 16 carries something else. Jodi was 11 years old when she died. 5 years later, the case was still cold. 10 years later, still no answers. 15 years later, technology finally began to catch up. And in the 16th year, in 2023, the case reached full closure. 16 years for a story that will be remembered for far longer. 16 years for a truth the community deserved to know. 16 years for a justice that would never have been possible without science, persistence, and a town unwilling to let go. Small towns do not forget. They may move forward. They may rebuild. They may heal. But they do not forget. Today, children in Constantine grow up hearing Jodi's story through the voices of their parents, carefully, respectfully, and gently. They grow up understanding why their community protects each other so fiercely. why certain places carry meaning, why certain anniversaries are honored. Jodi became more than a victim. She became a symbol, a reminder of the importance of safety, awareness, and unity. And most of all, she became a reminder that even the darkest tragedies can lead to progress, truth, and change. One chilling aspect of this story is how ordinary Daniel Furlong appeared. Neighbors described him as quiet, private, unremarkable, just another face in the crowd. But the deeper truth is something investigators know all too well. Danger does not always look dangerous. People who cause harm sometimes look exactly like everyone else. This is not meant to scare viewers. It's meant to highlight the importance of understanding that crimes like this do not always come from monsters in the shadows. Sometimes they come from people who blend in. This realization was part of Constantine's healing journey. It forced the community to rethink assumptions, to recognize warning signs they had missed, to teach their children lessons earlier than they wanted to. And yet, even in this painful understanding, they found strength. Knowledge is not only power, it is protection. As viewers hear Jodi's story, whether they live in a town of 2,000 people or a city of 2 million, the message is the same. Stay aware, trust your instincts, invest in your community, support your neighbors, and never underestimate the impact of forensic science. Because science, paired with persistence, is often the bridge between tragedy and justice. And because you never know which case, which advancement, or which test might finally deliver answers. Jodi's case proves this. Before technology caught up and the case reached its full closure in 2023, the months leading up to that final review were filled with quiet anticipation. Investigators revisited every step taken over the 16-year span. Every statement, every sample, every timeline, every theory. They spoke again with forensic scientists, requesting updated analysis using the newest techniques available. They examined DNA markers with modern tools that offered deeper insight than anything available in the early 2000s. Even though Furlong had already been convicted years earlier, detectives wanted more than just a name. They wanted certainty. They wanted completeness. They wanted unmistakable scientific confirmation that the truth they had was the full truth. And in the winter of 2023, they finally got it. When the Michigan State Police received the final genetic reports, the results were clear and unambiguous. The DNA recovered in 2007 belonged solely to Daniel Furlong. No other individual had contributed to the sample. There were no secondary profiles. The evidence supported, beyond any doubt, that he and he alone had taken Jodi's life. This confirmation mattered more than many people realized. For years, residents whispered theories. Was there someone else involved? Could another person have been present? What if Furlong was covering for someone? The 2023 review answered these questions definitively. There were no accomplices, no hidden conspiracies, no unresolved threads. Just one man, acting alone. For investigators who had invested years of their lives into the case, this closure felt deeply personal. Some retired officers were contacted, informed of the results, and allowed, even encouraged, to read the final reports. Several described the moment as emotional. One said it felt like a chapter finally closing after far too long. Another said, "We always knew, but now there is nothing left to wonder." When the results were shared with officials in Constantine, something subtle but profound happened. The town finally exhaled. For the first time in 16 years, they didn't have to wonder if someone else was still out there. They didn't have to glance over their shoulders. They didn't have to question every unknown face. The weight seemed to lift slightly, never fully gone, but lighter. People who had lived through the darkest days of the investigation felt something they hadn't felt in years. Relief, not happiness. Nothing about this case allows that word. But relief, as softening, a settling of the dust. For the first time, the case was not only solved, it was complete. Today, more than 15 years after that terrible November night, Jodi's name is still spoken with love and reverence throughout Constantine. Her classmates, now adults in their 20s, remember her as the lively girl who laughed easily, who loved riding her bike, who had a spark that made her unforgettable. Teachers remember the bright student in their classrooms. Neighbors remember seeing her pedal down the street. Parents remember the fear they felt for their own children after she went missing. And her family remembers everything, every smile, every moment, every irreplaceable piece of who she was. Her legacy is woven into the fabric of the community. There are annual memorials. There are quiet moments in the cemetery. There are residents who keep a candle in their window on November 9th each year. And there are children today who learn the importance of safety because their parents gently pass along the lessons learned from Jodi's story. Her name continues to mean something. Her life continues to inspire change. Her memory continues to shine. Over the years, true crime investigators, journalists, forensic analysts, and documentary creators have referenced Jodi's case for discussions about how DNA evidence evolves, the importance of re-evaluating unsolved cases, the impact of forensic genealogy, the dangers of community suspicion, and the significance of preserving biological samples for future testing. Her case is studied in training seminars across the country, not because of the tragedy alone, but because of the lessons it taught the world. And every time her case is used to help solve another, to inspire another breakthrough, to motivate another detective, to keep going, her legacy grows. This is what it means for light to remain, even when a life is taken too soon. There is something important viewers need to understand about long, difficult cases like this one. Cold cases are not failures. They are battles waiting for reinforcement. They are files waiting for the right tool, the right scientist, the right technology, the right moment. They are stories that do not stop demanding answers, even when the world changes around them. Most importantly, cold cases are reminders that every piece of evidence has a voice. Sometimes that voice is faint. Sometimes it takes years to amplify. But eventually, it can speak again. And when it does, justice listens. Jodi's case is one of the most powerful examples of this truth. When a crime like this happens in a small community, time doesn't move the same way. There is before the tragedy, and after the tragedy. And for 16 years, those two chapters defined Constantine. Parents changed the way they raised their children. School staff changed their protocols. Neighbors changed their habits. Police changed the way they handled missing child calls. The town grew wiser, more cautious, more connected. But it also grew stronger. The people of Constantine learned that grief is not the opposite of strength. Grief is the proof of love. Grief is the proof of community. Grief is the proof that a child's life mattered deeply. And Jodi's life mattered. It mattered in 2007. It mattered during the years the case remained unsolved. It mattered the day her killer was found. It mattered during the forensic review in 2023. And it matters today. Her name continues to echo throughout the town, not as a symbol of tragedy alone, but as a symbol of resilience. So often, true crime stories focus on the investigation, the evidence, the timeline. But behind every detail in a case file, there is a real person. Jodi was more than a victim, more than a headline, more than a name in a courtroom. She was a child who loved riding her bicycle, a child who laughed easily, a child who brought joy to her family, a child who had an entire future waiting ahead of her. She had dreams. She had favorite foods. She had inside jokes with friends. She had teachers who adored her. She had a smile that lit up her classroom. And she had a family that loved her more than words can ever express. It is important, essential, that we do not forget that. When telling stories like these, it's easy to get lost in the investigation. But Jodi's story is not just about a crime. It's about a little girl whose life was full of possibility, a life that should have continued. It's about a community that came together in love and grief. It's about her mother, who fought for answers for years. It's about the neighbors who never gave up searching. It's about the detectives who carried her memory through every shift, every lead, every setback. It's about the fact that her story still has meaning today, because her life had meaning. When investigators finally confirmed, with modern technology, that the DNA belonged solely to Daniel Furlong, it became more than closure for one case. It became a message to the world. Cold cases are solvable. Science continues to evolve. Answers can come even after years of silence. And because of cases like Jodi's, the tools law enforcement uses today are far more capable than they once were. Genetic genealogy, advanced mapping, touch DNA, forensic genealogy databases. These tools, and the determination behind them, are changing the landscape of justice. In a way, Jodi's story helped push science forward, helped inspire new cases to be reopened, helped remind the world that every victim deserves answers, no matter how long it takes. When Constantine learned that the case was fully resolved in 2023, the reaction wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, beautiful, heartfelt. Some people visited the cemetery, placing flowers at Jodi's resting place. Some lit candles in windows. Some whispered prayers. Some hugged their children tighter, and some simply smiled softly, grateful that the truth had finally settled. Residents later said that the final resolution felt like a promise being fulfilled. A promise the entire town had carried for 16 years. "We will not forget you, Jodi," and they never did. They never will. As you watch this documentary, whether from a quiet home or a busy city, it is important to understand why stories like Jodi's are told. We tell them to honor the victims, to bring attention to cases that shaped communities, to remind the world of the importance of forensic science, to show what persistence can accomplish, to demonstrate how one case can echo across decades. And we tell them because these stories remind us of something profoundly human. Justice matters. Truth matters. Children matter. Community matters. When you engage with these stories, when you watch, comment, like, share, you help ensure that victims are remembered and that their stories continue to teach the world how to do better. When we look back at November 8th and 9th, 2007, it becomes clear that these 2 days reshaped an entire town's identity. The night Jodi went missing, the community came together with urgency, determination, and hope. Everyone believed she would be found safe. Everyone believed the story would end differently. The next morning shattered that hope. But in the 16 years that followed, Constantine never abandoned Jodi's story. Not once, not for a moment. And that commitment, that unwavering devotion, is what kept the investigation alive. It is what pushed detectives to re-examine evidence again and again. It is what pressured state officials to keep the case open. It is what inspired new forensic methods. It is what carried Jodi's name forward into the future. A town that small is not supposed to carry a grief that big. But Constantine did, and they carried it with dignity. When the Michigan State Police released the 2023 updated forensic confirmation, investigators described the moment as cutting the final thread of uncertainty. For years, even after the conviction, there were whispers. What if? Could there have been someone else? Is there something we're missing? But the data was absolute. The analysis was final. The conclusion undeniable. There were no other individuals, no overlooked suspects, no genetic shadows, just one man acting alone. One piece of DNA, one confession, one truth, and that truth brought the closure the community had needed for 16 years. Some cases end with dramatic revelations in courtrooms. Some end with investigative breakthroughs. Jodi's case ended quietly. A printed scientific report, a conversation among detectives, a message passed to her family, and a statement shared with the public. No cameras. No spectacle. No dramatic confession on live television. Just a quiet truth settling over the town, like snow finally falling on a field that had been barren for far too long. Sometimes justice is not loud. Sometimes justice is not cinematic. Sometimes justice is a quiet moment in a small town where people finally know. We got the right person. Jodi's story is not only a reminder of tragedy, it is a reminder of progress. Her case is now used in training rooms across the country, teaching investigators. Never let evidence grow cold. Preserve every biological sample. Trust the DNA. Retest when technology improves. Let science speak when humans cannot. And most importantly, never give up. Because the truth may not come today. It may not come next year. It may not come for a decade, but it can come. And when it does, it brings justice with it. Jodi's case is living proof of that. When final closure arrived in 2023, it didn't erase the pain. It didn't undo the loss, but it closed the wound. It brought peace, not the loud, triumphant kind, but the quiet, gentle kind that settles over a town at sunset. Families who had feared for their children finally felt safe enough to exhale. Neighbors who had watched each other suspiciously for years rediscovered trust. Parents who had gripped their kids' hands tightly could finally loosen their hold. And the community, at long last, could begin to heal. The case had shaped Constantine for 16 years. And now, with the truth confirmed, the town could carry Jodi's memory forward without fear. Only love, remembrance, and strength. While detectives are often the faces of an investigation, countless others played critical roles in bringing closure to this case. Forensic scientists who preserved Jodi's evidence with extreme care. Technicians who tested and retested samples for years. Community volunteers who searched through the night in 2007. Journalists who kept the case in the public eye. Prosecutors who built a careful, respectful case. Judges who ensured fairness throughout the process. Residents who maintained hope when the story felt impossibly heavy. All of these people, known and unknown, helped stitch together the truth. And that truth is now part of Constantine's story forever. Above everything, above the science, above the investigation, above the prosecution, above the headlines, there is one reality. This story is about an 11-year-old girl. A girl who should have grown up. A girl who should have gone to prom. A girl who should have graduated high school. A girl who should have celebrated her birthdays. A girl who should have lived. Jodi Parrack should still be here. Her absence is felt by everyone who loved her, by everyone who searched for her, by everyone who followed this case. But her story, her spirit, her impact remain. She is remembered not for the way her life ended, but for the light she brought while she was here. As the years pass, seasons continue to change across Constantine Township Cemetery. Snow gathers gently in the winter. Leaves fall softly in the autumn. Spring brings low green grass and quiet sunlight. Summer warms the headstones and fills the air with birdsong. Life moves. Time moves. But remembrance stays. And if you walk through the cemetery on a still morning, you will find that the quiet carries an echo. A soft presence. A whisper of memory. A reminder that a child who once rode her bicycle through this small town will never be forgotten. Not here. Not in Constantine. Not by those who loved her. Not by those who searched for her. Not by those who fought for answers. And not by those who hear her story today. Jodi's case reminds us that tragedy can break a community, but it can also bind one together. It reminds us that justice can be delayed, but it can still come. It reminds us that science can evolve, and that every breakthrough has the power to change a life, a family, a town. It reminds us that forgiveness is complicated, and that healing takes time. And above all, it reminds us that no matter how many years pass, no matter how cold a case becomes, no matter how dark the path may seem, hope does not expire. Every unanswered question carries the possibility of a future breakthrough. Every preserved sample carries the possibility of a match. Every cold case carries the possibility of justice. And every story, especially one like this, carries the possibility of helping another. When we step back and look at everything Constantine endured, this becomes more than a true crime case. It becomes a portrait of the human spirit, a portrait of mothers and fathers who refused to give up, a portrait of neighbors who kept searching year after year, a portrait of detectives who carried a child's memory across their entire career, a portrait of a town that stayed united through one of the darkest moments in its history. And woven through it all is the light of an 11-year-old girl who was loved fiercely. Her life mattered. Her story mattered. Her memory still matters. And her legacy now stretches far beyond the borders of a small Michigan town. A quiet road lined with Michigan trees. the slow turning of autumn leaves, a small bicycle leaning against a porch, a sunset dipping behind the rooftops of Constantine. And in that golden, fading light, the memory of a little girl whose laughter once echoed through these streets. A girl who deserved more. A girl who deserved a full life. A girl whose story continues to teach us, warn us, inspire us. In the end, Jodi's name is not defined by the man who harmed her. Her name is defined by the love she gave, the joy she brought, and the resilience of the community that will carry her memory forever. This is how Constantine remembers her. This is how her family remembers her. And this is how we remember her. Today, tomorrow, and always. Thank you for watching this episode of Beyond the Case. If Jodi's story moved you, if you believe every victim deserves remembrance, if you want more deep dive, respectful, and detailed true crime investigations like this, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people discover important stories like Jodi's. Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. I love seeing this community come together from all over the world. And if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release powerful, carefully researched true crime documentaries every week. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Your engagement helps these cases reach more eyes. And together, we remind the world that no victim is forgotten. This has been Beyond the Case. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering Jodi. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of one another.